James at 16 will not be presented this evening, but will return next week at its regular time. Stay tuned now for a special 2-hour What Really Happened to the Class of 65.
Word Balloon is brought to you by the League of Word Balloon Listeners.
Hi, I'm Alex Ross.
The two pieces are sort of a type. They're both kind of recreations of artwork that existed in the 90s. In fact, this piece here for the Avengers is in most ways a recreation or a tribute to George Perez's poster version from the mid-90s, where he did a shot that featured in it a figure of Captain America that was very similar to what I've done here, positioning of the Vision or positioning of Hawkeye, and I believe a few other elements are very similar to that piece, and it's consciously so. I was building off that inspiration, but I kind of refitted my design to fill out bigger shots of the figures so that I was making a wider composition and getting in a lot of the same characters, but still not quite as many as what George himself did, because George's thing was always to try and get in the maximum amount of content into pieces that he did.
I don't know if anyone can hear me, but I'm not hearing John right now, which is terrifying, because that means that this is my show. There he is. I'm taking over the show.
I understand. Hang on.
Okay. This is
Echo.
This is exciting. I had a bunch of technical difficulties right before we started. Now John's having some technical difficulties. This is how it works. This is what we do today.
This is true. Can you hear me now?
I've got you. Do you have me?
I have you fine. Absolutely. Sorry, everybody. All right, now we're good. Welcome, Tim Sheridan.
This is a live show. This is what happens. It's exciting.
Absolutely, man. No. It's great to talk to you. And I'm sorry, everybody. I'm on my iPad, so I can't do images. But we all know why we're here. We're here to talk about the great Golden Age Green Lantern, Alan Scott. And Tim has a miniseries coming up in the fall. I assume maybe it's not a miniseries. Tim, you tell me.
It is. It's 6 issues. I always like to say it's 6 issues unless people buy the hell out of it. And then it's amazing how many, issues I think show up after that happens. So please, if you enjoy it, pick it up. We just had a 6-page prologue came out last week in DC Pride Through the Years #1.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure you saw me talking about literally every day on social media, getting the word out. There's a little on-ramp to our story.
Tim, I'm going to be completely honest. Years ago, when everything was retconned for the New 52, and James Robinson was doing that Earth 2 book that kind of reintroduced the Justice Society, and he made Alan Scott a gay character.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest, my initial reaction was, well, I got no problem with a gay Green Lantern, but does it have to be Alan Scott? And James mollified me, I guess, for the moment, and said, well, it's Earth 2, it's not the Golden Age Green Lantern. Then for his 80th anniversary, I believe, James Tynion kind of retold the origin, and James really opened my eyes, and I'm like, okay, because what would it be like for a 1940 superhero to not only have a secret identity, but also be a closeted gay man? And I'm like, okay, that's interesting. Not that the gay lifestyle isn't interesting, but truly
John,
to imprint that. Yeah, tell me about it.
It's incredibly interesting, the gay lifestyle. I've been living it my whole life. But what was amazing was the Watchmen TV show had touched on this.
Yes, they did.
It was really interesting, wasn't it? And I think that was what got me really excited about doing this.
That's cool. I totally forgot about that because I was going to ask, had there been a Golden Age hero portrayed as a gay man? And you're right, we had Hooded Justice and Captain Metropolis, I believe. Yeah, they were the couple, and certainly we saw them. And if you read the Under the Hood excerpts and also the lousy things that the comedian said, you know, calling Nelson Nelly and then all the other BS. No, that was interesting. But really, this is very intriguing. Now, I know this is, and especially given what was shown in the Pride preview, we have a modern day Alan Scott saying, well, I don't talk much about the war and my early days. And, you know, I wasn't always the Green Lantern, which introduced this scene, a pre-Green Lantern scene of Alan. Yeah, I know. I appreciate the raised eyebrows. No, this is really intriguing. So will this story entirely be about Alan's pre-Green Lantern days, or will we see a bit of him?
No.
Good.
That's just how we're starting off. Now, see, there's a reason for that. And the reason is that, you know, if you read Flashpoint Beyond, and I hope you did, with that I got to work on with Jeff Johns and Jeremy Adams. At the end of that book, you saw that there were these 13 people who had been removed from continuity, been removed from the timeline. This was a very Jeff Johns sort of idea, right? And I mean that in like the greatest way. Like, I'm crazy about that guy. And so they were removed from time by Rip Hunter and then reintroduced into the timeline. And one of those characters was, the Red Lantern. And we saw in New Golden Age #1 by Jeff, we saw a really mind-blowingly cool classic Who's Who entry for the Red Lantern that explained a little bit about his story and his origin. And it places his first appearance in is it in Green Lantern #1? It's in Green Lantern #1, I think, is
okay.
The entry, not All American 16.
Gotcha.
I think. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's what it says in the entry. Anyway, for me, that stuff just opens up the doors of imagination. And that's one of the things I love about Jeff and working with Jeff, is he's got all these fun ideas percolating all the time. So the idea is arch nemesis of the Golden Age Green Lantern, Alan Scott, was removed from his timeline. So essentially what that means is everything we've seen, all of continuity that we've experienced in all these years, was kind of a retcon, right? So if this character, this arch nemesis, was reintroduced into the timeline, you would think that would have some ramifications on how Alan Scott's story played out over the years. So because that's the conceit surrounding this new Golden Age initiative, that the banner that Jeff is helming at DC right now, we had an opportunity to sort of revisit Alan's early days. And when I say early days, I mean even days that we may not have seen before, the earliest days. And so that's why we start. This is such a long-winded answer.
This is all good. Don't kid yourself.
When you get me going, I will just keep going. So
good.
So that's why we get to start. We meet him before he's even become the Green Lantern. And we're going to see a little bit more of that in issue 1 and issue 2. But we will also see him as the Green Lantern. So don't fear not. We'll be playing with jumping back and forth a little bit in his timeline. Time is a funny thing, isn't it, John?
Certainly in the right hands. In the right hands, time can be a funny thing.
Yeah.
No, I'm excited, man. The first time I saw Alan Scott was a reprint of, it might have been in Superheroes Team Up, a 70s reprint book, but it was that original showcase story where Dr. Fate and Hourman are fighting Solomon Grundy. Oh. And at the very end of the story, Alan Scott shows up. Now, I had been raised on Hal Jordan and, classic Silver Age and early 70s Green Lantern. And all of a sudden, there's this blonde guy in the red tunic and the purple cape and everything. And it's like, oh, Green Lantern, thank God you're here. And it's like, what? But I love the costume, and I was really excited. And then, of course, James, when he did the Golden Age, and he made Alan kind of, the de facto leader of this Superman, Batman, less retconned Justice Society, and Johnny Quick, kept referring to Alan as the big guy. And it's like, I like this, and I know how important the character was to the All-American line, which was running with the national line. But that's where Jay Garrick was. That's where Alan Scott was. And it's great. And I've always adored these, his place in the Justice Society and the DC universe as this longtime leader, making him gay. And also, again, it's going to be very intriguing. And I'm assuming you're going to deal with him possibly coming out to some of his 40s contemporaries, possibly finding some other conflicts with other heroes that, should they find out, may not appreciate his lifestyle. Again, I don't want to spoil your story.
I'm going to spill it all right now. No, I'm not. I'm going to leave some surprises, but I will say, because of the nature and the conceit that I was talking about, of where we're kind of revisiting his story, there's room for big surprises and things that you may think about Alan's story, but not. I'm not. We're not just going to blow everything up. We don't just blow it all up and start over. The thing about timelines is that even when certain elements are removed from them, they still tend to sort of form around basic major life events and things that happen for these characters. By the way, that feeling that you had when you were reading that book and this Alan Scott, this Golden Age Green Lantern showed up in this wild outfit, like that feeling that you had of like, wait, this is a thing, this guy exists. That's the feeling that I think Jeff was going for by reintroducing these characters into the continuity. This idea of, wait, there was a Golden Age Red Lantern character. I had somebody at a con last weekend. I was chatting with a fan, and they said, I've never even read any of the classic Red Lantern, Golden Age Red Lantern stories. And I didn't, I felt bad. I had to tell them. I was like, well, actually, they don't exist yet. So that's half the fun. But yeah, in terms of Alan's, the modern lens, as I put it, through which we now see Alan Scott, specifically, that's my clever way of referring to the fact that he's now come out of the closet. It completely, for me, informs that character when I go back and read all the way back to All-American 16, his origin story and first appearance. It changes everything for me. And when I view it through that lens, I got to tell you, John, listen, the internet's a horrible place. Sorry, internet.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people who are going to be really angry with me when I say this, but when I look at that, when I read his early adventures now, I look at it and I think, I think there might have been some coding going on from some of the people who were writing this book or drawing this book or editing this book. There might have been. I don't know. I will never know. But it's interesting to me that now through that lens, we get to sort of re-experience it and think maybe that was the way it was. But regardless, this story is in a lot of ways a love letter to an era in the civil rights movement in our country, certainly, and a particular time in that movement. And when I say a love letter, I mean more like a Dear John letter. Like, I feel like this is a little bit of me, trying to put some new context to that stuff, and maybe put some things behind us and move on. That's what Alan is hopefully going to go through in this story. This is about a man coming out of the darkness and into the light. That's to me, that's Alan's story. It's a lot of the Lantern's story, right? but it should be. That should be what their story is, regardless of who they marry or who they love.
Sure.
That's what the story is. In Alan's case, he's got very very specific things that relate to the darkness in his time, and so this story will be mostly set in 1941. But we begin, as you saw in the DC Pride issue, in the 1930s, just so we can get a little context.
I'm so blanking right now. Shame on me. And it's a Chicago guy that was the artist in the original Green Lantern series. He worked for Leo Burnett.
The guy who created,
the artist.
Yeah, Martin Nodell.
Martin Nodell, of course, Martin Nodell.
Yeah. Or Mark Dellin, I think he went by.
Oh, was that his pen name?
Mark Dellin. Yeah.
Well, I had the pleasure.
Bill Finger, of course.
As well. Yes, Bill Finger wrote it. I had the pleasure of meeting Mr. Nodell before he passed. He would come to the Chicago conventions regularly, and also with his wife, who was a doll. And I have a couple Alan Scott little 3x5 sketches he did. But yeah,
everyone, John, everyone, you've met everyone. I'm so jealous of you,
dude. It's because I'm old, and I've been doing the podcast.
Right you, man.
I've been doing the podcast for 18 years, and I only started going to conventions in 2000. That was my first time I went to a con.
Hey, that was mine too. 2000.
Oh, that's awesome.
It was San Diego.
Oh wow! Well, you win.
2000. Yeah,
that's great. I was here in Chicago. We had the Wizard Show then, which now is the Fan Expo show. Yeah. But it was great meeting Nodell, and not only did he co-create Alan Scott, he created the Poppin' Fresh character for Pillsbury.
Yeah, yeah,
exactly.
That was Martin Nodell. Yeah, exactly.
But no,
he did. He kind of got I don't know if you talked to him about it, but what I've read is that he kind of got disgusted doing the comic books and went into advertising and was doing that and that, because I don't think the Green Lantern wasn't like there was a glut of sort of Superman clones that were happening because of the success of Superman.
Certainly.
So I don't know that Green Lantern was all that successful. And his solo title ended up, only lasting until 1949 or something like that.
Yeah, but still, I mean, that wasn't a short run. I mean, that was several years, obviously.
But this guy thought, well, that was it. Now I'm out. I'm going into advertising. And look at here we are today. It's 74 years later, and Alan Scott is finally getting his own series, his own name on the book again.
I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled, and also, always a great character. I had why I gave him away, I have no idea, but I bought those JSA PVC little 3-inch characters. I just love the designs of a lot of the Golden Age costumes, and truly, Alan Scott and Rex Tyler, original Our Man, those are just such classic designs. I absolutely love them.
I haven't talked to. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that. Alan's always been a great character. He was in Action Comics Weekly in the 90s and had his own feature there. They de-aged him. And that's the thing. So again, he's gone through this soft reboot of his history. Well, the big one that I think people are curious about, and again, I don't want to spoil your story, but Alan did lead a triple life, and not only in terms of just keeping things quiet regarding his orientation, but also married, at least once, if not twice.
He married Rose Canton, right? And he got married later too, right?
Molly, and I forget what her the Harlequin, was she the original Harlequin, I believe?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So that's the thing. So again, forgive me, man, but I'm just curious, and I don't want to spoil. I've already been warned. Watch what you ask. But no, is Alan bisexual? Is he again, or will it be explained in the series in terms of these relationships with women?
I mean, look, I'm not. I didn't make Alan gay, right? Like that wasn't, and that was something that was, that came with the character when Jeff asked me to do the book, and I mean, I was excited about it because I love the idea of it. But I think he's come out as gay, and my story deals with his homosexuality as part of his identity, right? It's about secret identities in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And this is a big one in that period, in this particular period, and before World War II. And so in this, the way this story is conceived, here we go, lots of information. Everybody ready? This is big. I'm not planning on getting into, and I'm not at the moment, I'm not getting into his later life, and the adventures that happen after this story. Like I said, this story really takes place in 1941.
Okay.
And so all that stuff that came later, hopefully we'll get a chance to come back to it and look at his life now that the Red Lantern has been reintroduced. Maybe there's a new shading on some of those classic stories. One of the big questions I get, though, is, if Alan Scott, a lot of people ask me this as if, like I said, it wasn't DC decided to have him come out of the closet, but one of the questions is, well, do Jade and Obsidian still exist? Are they still his kids? Like, and we saw that's still, that family is still intact. And I'm not uprooting any of that. Like, to me, that's families come in all different shapes and sizes and colors. And there are all kinds of reasons, why people become families. And listen, I got to tell you, Jade and Obsidian, like, their origins are not like, sugar sweet.
Not at all.
It's very complicated, the way in which they are Alan's children. And I don't think Alan, being a closeted gay man in all of his life, is any more complicated, in making him their dad. I don't think it's any more complicated.
I absolutely agree. And in fact, it just makes the three of them that much more interesting because of the weird broken family that they come from. Todd was, Obsidian was abused by his, I don't know if it was an orphan father or a stepfather or whatever. And Jade had her troubles as well. And again, it makes them more complicated characters. Complex is good. I know you feel that way. I think most of us, us old-time readers and stuff, it's like, no, man, we've gone beyond the 10-page story that was written for 10-year-olds 70, 80 years ago. And it's like, no, bring on the complexity. And that's why I'm really glad we're at a point in our society where we can have these kind of stories. And it only makes it more interesting. And I know there was an echo of it in Cavalier and Clay, the Michael Chabon book. And I believe one of them also ended up having a relationship with the actor that was playing the escapist. And I totally, like I said, I totally forgot about Captain Metropolis and Hooded Justice. And it's interesting. And I think it's worthy of exploration.
I got myself into some trouble last year, John, when I was, or maybe last year, I don't know when it was, I guess it was last year, on Twitter. I took it upon myself to go out there and say something that I thought was in support of Tom Taylor and Megan Fitzmartin and what was happening with John Kent and Tim Drake, and essentially tried to make a joke, which wasn't, I guess, that funny, about how some fans say, oh, don't make existing characters come out of the closet, create new characters. And I'm like, hey, people,
guilty.
We create new characters all the time who are queer, but they don't, a lot of times those people who gave that note don't go and pick up those characters. They don't go and pick up those books. And so they say, go ahead, make new characters gay, but then they don't necessarily. Anyway, I said this, I was being very glib, and, people I got a lot of support, but it was funny because I wasn't really thinking about the fact that it applied to Alan Scott, which wasn't announced yet that I was doing it, but I kind of knew it was in the pipeline.
Okay.
But it definitely applies. And it's this, and this is what I want to say about it. It does not threaten anyone if a character who's existed in the universe comes out of the closet later in their life. just as it doesn't threaten anyone if someone you know in your real life comes out of the closet later in life. It doesn't change anything. It doesn't mean they were trying to lie to you necessarily. It's, you know, society, the big S, society, has made it very difficult for a lot of people, especially people of a certain age, to be open about who they are and maybe who they've always been. And so Alan's story of coming out of the closet the way he has in currently in continuity is, to me, is very real. And I don't see any reason why that kind of representation shouldn't exist in comics, of someone who's, you know, been around a while, finally, telling the world who they are, and telling the kids who they are. I think it's real, and it's real. These are our friends, they're our neighbors, they're our parents, they're all around us every day. And comics are only good. Stories are only good. Movies and TV, they're only good if they're about us and about our neighbors and our family and our friends and our brothers and sisters. So that's my argument for for Tim Drake and for Alan Scott and John Kent, everybody. Well, John
I'm with
Kent
you, man.
had an argument though, because like he was a little kid, like, you know, you don't know. He was a little kid. When he got older, he understood who he was. That's how it was for me. I didn't know until I was, I don't know, 13 or something, that I was gay. And it was, I figured that out in a time and a place when it was not a good thing to be a gay kid. So I kept it quiet, and a lot like Alan Scott. And so a lot of kids today, some kids today are in a very fortunate position of being able, depending on their circumstances, being able to be who they are and be open about it from a young age. But I do identify with that part of Alan's story. And so I'm trying to bring a little bit of that to the book. But I don't know what it was like in the 30s and 40s. And I've done a lot of research, and Kian Tormey and I have both done a lot of research, who is, you know, the fantastic artist on
great art. Absolutely, man.
Oh my God. We'll talk about him in a second. But more I want to say about Kian.
All right.
But yeah, it's that period of time, you know, there's some real bad stuff that people had to deal with. And I want to see what the people who were born to be heroes, like Alan Scott, what do they do when they come up against that stuff? You know, how do they rise to the occasion, and how do they lead us out of it? I think that's what we're trying to do with this story.
Well, again, I always feel that Alan and Jay had this level of nobility, being who they were in the Justice Society as the leaders. And again, I think this makes the challenges that he likely faced more compelling and more interesting. It's an extra burden.
I'm going to give you a little
Secret Life.
I'm going to give you a little look into issue 1. Are you ready?
Okay.
So not visually, because we can't show anything.
Yeah, I'm sorry, everybody. Go on.
But that's okay, because I'm going to tell you a little something, which is there is an angle on. We will see Alan Scott, the Green Lantern, in a time when the Justice Society is newly formed in issue 1, and but we're going to see him in a moment when he is not taken the leadership role that we expect that Alan Scott would take within the JSA. And there are a lot of reasons for that. And so that's kind of where we meet him in 1941, is as a guy who has lent his name to the JSA masthead, but is not in, you know, is still kind of going it alone out there, as he's used to doing the last few years. He's been wearing the cape and the ring. And he's got reasons for keeping his distance, which a lot of guys in his position keep their distance and kept their distance from the people they should be close to. And so that's part of his journey too, is, you know, we meet him in a place where he hasn't fully embraced the idea of being in the JSA, even though he is a founding member.
That's great, man. No, again, I really think it adds a very compelling wrinkle to the Alan Scott story. And yeah, you know, and again, I mean, I was fine with Tim and John with their choices of their orientation, and they're young men, and it's a different time now, and thankfully, hopefully, as you say, in the right circumstances, more people can deal with that, and that's why this 40s story, I think, is going to be incredibly interesting to explore.
It's a great, big, beautiful multiverse, and you know, it doesn't take anything away from anyone.
Nope.
You know, it's just other wrinkles and other angles on characters, and you know, I think everybody deserves to be able to pick up a comic book and see themselves. So you know, for some people, hey, maybe it's not for you, but I bet if you gave it a shot, you'd pick up these stories and you'd see that just because these characters are queer doesn't mean that they aren't like you. That, you know, I wrote a movie, an animated movie called Superman Man of Tomorrow, and that movie, I didn't tell anybody, but that until the very end of my part of the process, when it was going into production, or when it was going into actual animation, and I said, you know, this is a coming out story. Like, it's a hidden sort of coming out story. It's in a lot of ways, my story. You know, obviously I don't have Kryptonian superpowers. It's just the idea of not feeling like you can be who you are in public, and hiding it away because of fear of how people will respond to you in the world, wanting to be loved, wanting to be liked, and being terrified of how people will react. If in Kal-El's case, people find out he's an alien. That's what he's coming out about. It's not that he's gay in that movie. It's that he's coming out as an alien. And but a lot of people see Superman's story. They see that. They see, you know, an immigrant story, you know, which they can also identify with. And I just think that comic books and these archetypal heroes and these characters I think that's what we have them for. We have them so that we can try to have as many people see themselves in those heroes as possible. And so you listen to the stuff that applies to you, and you can translate it in your head, and you might find that there's a lot of meaning and a lot that you identify with in a character who in real life is nothing like you, possibly. But you know, that's what great stories are all about. So I hope we're able to, with this story, get some people who wouldn't necessarily pick up an Alan Scott book because they're like, well, if he's not interested in boobs, why am I reading about Alan Scott? And I'm like, well, I don't think that was ever really Alan's story anyway, so I don't know.
I'm with you, man. Again, I'm okay with it, and who the fuck cares what I think? But you know, well, that's nice, Tim. I appreciate that. No, I think it's interesting. It wasn't there before, but I think there's room to do this. And again, it's a great way to explore a very different person that leads a secret life. All the heroes lead secret lives. It doesn't diminish him as a hero. He's one of the great. He's always been my favorite. Green Lantern will always remain my favorite. And like I said, it took Tynan and his explanation. I'm like, okay, that's interesting. That wasn't, again, it's like, I'm okay with gay characters. I think introducing new characters, period. And Alan Scott is not a new character, but I think to introduce them in a solo capacity, no matter what their orientation is, that's hard. And I think what you need to do, and I think some of the characters that have caught on and become significant were introduced in either team situations or as a temporary side character in an established book. I mean, you've created other new characters in your Titans run.
What a segue! That was the best segue I've ever. That was amazing. It was really good, because you're right. Like, it is tough, but you know, on that Titans Academy book, you know, I went in and said, I said to them, you know, DC had this concept for Titans Academy and this basic idea, and they said, what would you do with it? And I said, the first thing I said was, well, in order for an academy to make sense, I'm going to need a whole class of characters, a whole freshman class of kids who are the heroes of tomorrow that are, you know, been identified and are being, you know, by the Titans and are being trained by them. So they just, I thought they'd laugh me out of the place when I'm like, I'm going to create a whole bunch of new characters. And, but they said, yeah, do it. So I submitted a list, and pretty much like basically that first list I gave them are the characters that ended up in the book. Now but these were teenagers, and it's a teen book, so it was tough to really look. It was also my first time ever writing a comic book, and there were and a DC was going through unreal upheaval in those moments. It was behind the scenes there was a lot of stuff going on, and it was my first one. And I just think I was talking to Jeff about this the other day. I said, you know, I'm far enough out from Academy now where I'm like, God, I am so proud that book exists, because there was such a long time when I felt like I was holding it together with Scotch tape and bubble gum, but it exists. It's out there, and there are great, fun characters that we got to introduce. I am looking down because I'm trying to find in the DC Book of Pride.
Okay.
My favorite character here, Stitch, was kind of the breakout character from Academy, it turned out, who I didn't think was going to be. But they are a magically animated ragdoll who just by their nature has no gender, so they identify as genderqueer. But you know, Stitch is so much more than just their orientation. I mean,
right, of course, yeah.
Mercurial characters breaking the fourth wall because of the magic that they wield. They're the apprentice to Dr. Fate, which is the sort of pre-Titans Academy, which we never really saw, but we saw a little bit of interaction with them. But I just had a blast with like those characters. Gorilla Greg is a character that I just really, really just love, and was so glad we got to do sort of a version. You know, he's Grodd's nephew, and he's good. That's what makes him different, and why he's sort of rejected by his family or by his uncle. We got to have fun. There were also other queer characters in there, but like the fact that they were kids, I didn't get into. Just like it for me, I didn't know until maybe I was 13 or so that I was queer, and then I didn't tell anybody for a while until I was like 18, maybe.
Wow.
No, I told somebody before that, but yeah, that's all. But really, mostly I didn't tell anybody until I was 18. But you know, Chupacabra, who's one of the Bat Pack, you know, he is, you know, sort of slowly revealed to be gay throughout the book, or queer throughout the book. And his story is in a lot of ways a queer allegory. I mean, and you know, the original idea was he's this character who is essentially going through this monstrous version of puberty, where he's slowly becoming more and more bat-like because of this bastardized version of the Langstrom serum that he was injected with. And so we met him in Future State when he had already gone through this massive transformation. It was more bat-like. Well, when we meet him in Academy, which takes place earlier, he's just a little kid who kind of looks like a little goth kid who has this sort of bat look about him. And the idea, if we had kept going with the book, or if they had kept going with the book, I was only ever going to do 12 issues. I ended up doing 15. Was that we would show him sort of developing into a little bit more bat-like. But that, so that was a puberty sort of allegory with him. But also, the idea was this sort of othering of him, and this thing that sort of looked monstrous on the outside, but he was a very sweet and determined kid, and a soulful kid. Turns out he was an artist, and you know, Diego Perez was his name, and we met his uncle Jorge at the end, and who encouraged him to get out there and keep making art, keep making beautiful things. And there was so much that was queer about that character, and I'm just really glad that he's out there. Those are new characters, like you said. Like they're new characters. A lot of people responded to them, and some people didn't really, didn't respond to the book. I mean, that's the way books go. I mean, some people love it. Some people it's not for them, and good, go with God.
Yeah.
But I like I said, I'm just really proud that it's out there at all, because if people knew the behind the scenes, it was so tough to make that book. It was so tough.
Were there concerns from an editorial standpoint in any way, or?
There were always concerns from an editorial standpoint on that book. It was, and only because I think because editorial was constantly in upheaval during that time.
Yes.
I think I had 3 group editors go through during the run of those 15 issues. I had 3 or 4 editors, I think, that, successively on that book. Artists, new artists every few pages, let alone issues sometimes, which was tough. There was a moment when we were going to do a particular story, and it got right up to the end. Rafa did these incredible designs. Rafa Sandoval did these incredible designs for these characters who were going to be another team, a rival team to the kids of Titans Academy. We got up right to the edge. We were about to start working on this issue. It was a 2-part issue, and or 2-part story, and we got the word from I think it came from Daniel Cherry directly, who was the general manager or something of DC at the time, and he said, "Nah, let's do something else." And I was like, so I scrambled to come up with this 2-part Grodd Greg story at the last minute, which actually turned out to be a great little story. I think one of my favorites. So sometimes it works out, when those things happen, but I had it was a wild birth, let's say, in the world of comics.
I'm not reading everything, and if it is being addressed in another book or another book that you're writing, forgive me. But obviously, with Titans Academy, you had the mystery of the Red X, which didn't get solved. And again, I don't want you to spoil. Will you have the opportunity to revisit that story in some capacity?
What's funny, and I've never really talked about this, but I'll talk about it with you.
Thanks, buddy.
Which is, Red X wasn't part of the pitch on that book, and it was it was the larger story of Academy was about this character named Dane Nevermore, son of the Underlord, who may or not be Lucifer, and the bringing of the horsemen, of the riders of the apocalypse, and the death and destruction of the world that we saw in Future State, then playing out over the course of Titans Academy. And at some point early in the process, my editor, Mike Cotton, at the time, who was at DC, now he's executive editor at AWA, he said, "Oh, do you know Red X?" And I said, "But yeah," because I had come from animation. I mean, my background was working in animation, specifically DC related animation. And I said, "Of course I know who Red X is." I was just doing a pitch with Glenn Murakami the other day, who ran the Teen Titans show, and he said because we might have an opportunity to bring Red X into the main continuity in DC. He's never been in it. And what do you think about us bringing him into Academy? And I was like, yeah, sure. There's all kinds of kids. We could throw him in. And I didn't, in retrospect, like, I had no idea what I was getting myself into, because, there was a lot of intense interest in Red X, and DC got wind of that very quickly. And so we had to pivot and really make Red X a much bigger part of that story. Was, which adding any characters into a story that already had so many characters was going to be tough. So it made it a little unwieldy, but I think we did some cool stuff, because the way I wrapped my head around it was, I said, look, Glenn has said that this. So for anybody who doesn't know, let me just give you the quick primer on Red X, right? Red X was a character that premiered in the Teen Titans animated series that Glenn Murakami made for Warner Animation. And it was in the first issue, the first episode, when we meet Red X, it's Dick Grayson, spoiler alert, who is put on a sort of an artificial, a fake persona, so that he can do some underhanded stuff that's non-Titan-y, non-Robin-y stuff. And that is the Red X. And but there's something about the design of the character and the way that they used him and his kind of gadgets that he had and stuff. He was so cool that he just, I think, captured everybody's imagination. So
great.
He retired the persona at the end of the episode, But then they ended up bringing a second Red X in that
Yep.
Robin had come up against, and they never revealed who it was under the map. And so so Glenn had been asked about this in public and had in the press and had said, "I will never reveal the identity of that second Red X."
Wow.
And so I have great respect for that man, and I said, "Look, if I'm going to come in, I'm not going to," because what DC was talking about was revealing the identity of a Red X, the Red X character.
Sure.
I said, "I'm not going to reveal."
I didn't realize.
Because that's Glenn's department.
Yeah, yeah.
And I want people to feel like this stuff is connected to the animated show, that
Sure.
we're not just doing a whole new thing, because that animated show was amazing, you know.
Absolutely.
And so I said, here's what I want to do. I want to have that Red X2, as we call him. He grew up just like the Titans grew up. We saw them in that TV series and they were kids. They were teens, right? But in Titans Academy, they were adults. They
Right.
were the faculty of the. So we had kind of dealt with the idea that they had grown up a little bit here, and so now they have very different. They have very different. Their view of the world is different. Everything's different about them.
Sure.
And let's do the same thing for Red X2. Red X2 also grew up. He's got a different view of things now, and we won't meet him. I mean, there was a point when we were never going to meet him, but what he did was he recruited a kid and made him a new Red X. And I even said he wasn't even Red X3, he was Red X4. So there's this other Red X3 that nobody knows who that is. And I just offhand line. So there's been 4 Red X's. The youngest one was a student at Titans Academy. That was the one who we revealed his identity. And although that reveal was different than what the intended reveal was going to be, because DC wanted to make a change. But yeah, so but we introduced that Red X2 character, the adult version of that Red X2 character, and he kind of went off into the sunset. And we never said who he was under the mask, and he's still out there. You know, who knows? Maybe Tom Taylor will pick him up and have him show up and come up against the team again at some point. I don't know.
Certainly. No, I understand. And by the way, I'll get my chance to talk to Tom in the weeks and months ahead. But I did talk to Nicholas Scott and said it's really great that DC is taking this moment to elevate the Titans to be a first line team, and it doesn't diminish the Justice Society. And we all know that the brand of the Justice Society will not stay dormant forever. This, much like the Justice Society, kind of taking a step and still a vital team, but letting the Justice League be the frontline team as long as they were. And that's the thing. And I think it's great for the comics. It keeps the comics distinct from what's happening in TV and film. And again, it gives them a chance to shine. And there's my generation, your generation. I know you're slightly younger, but if at the very least slightly. But no, it's
these gray hairs, John. Look at them. This is dyed. It's white now.
I got. Believe me, if my beard were grown out, you'd see mine. I got my Reed Richards sideburns. I totally understand. But no,
you're going to get no argument from this guy about elevating the Titans, and I feel like, in some ways, I'm insanely jealous that that's the book that that Tom and Nicola are getting to do, because the concept of Titans Academy was about a new generation of heroes being trained by them.
Yes,
and it made it very difficult to make it a story about the original New Teen Titans.
The teachers, sure.
The teachers, yeah. So it was a balancing act, but there were, it was if they had just said, "Hey, you get to write Teen Titans," and it's the original New Teen Titans lineup, I mean, I would have passed out. I would have been so happy. They let me create a whole bunch of characters, so that was pretty dang cool. So I'm not complaining about it, but I'm jealous that they get to have the book that they're getting to do, which is so cool.
Well, and I want to take a moment and congratulate you for the cartoon Superman Man of Tomorrow. It's a great story, outstanding story, and again, that's wonderful. I know we're in the midst of a writer's strike right now, and you obviously are an active WGA member. Well said. Well, I'm an active Screen Actors Guild member, and I certainly voted for. We still got, I think, a couple days of negotiation before we're officially on strike, I believe, as I understand it. But I certainly voted like, hey, if you can't come to terms, strike. This has to be stopped. People need to be paid fairly. There's a misconception on some people in the audience that I don't think are properly informed, that are a bit knuckleheady about it, where they're like, well, I haven't liked a lot of the TV or film I've been getting, so why do they get more money? And it's like, no, that's no. The work is being done that is not being paid for, and the owners of these media companies are like, so, and it's like, no, that can't stand. And AI and God, as from an acting standpoint and a writing standpoint, something has to be done. Rules have to be established, and these need to be addressed. And that's why there's a strike going on. At least that's my perception of what's happening.
There are, and you mentioned this, and I'm glad you identified it, because there really is there are a lot of misconceptions out there about, the power, the political power of a writer in the process of the creation of a project. We are the originators of these, of many of these things, of these stories, of these characters. Yes, there is great power and influence in that. But, like when I'm doing something for, DC, I don't just get to do whatever I want. Like, I've got a notes call tomorrow morning that we just scheduled to talk about the next issue of the Green Lantern that I just delivered, because there's stuff that's in there that they're going to be like, you can't do this. And that's the same way in TV. It's the same way in films. And, we ultimately work for these big companies, and they ultimately own the stuff when we're working with IP. When we're working with their intellectual property, they own it, and we're stewards, if anything. And so, but I tend to see that there's a lot of outsized, like, this idea of this outsized influence of like that we just get to run roughshod over whatever, as if DC didn't want XYZ to happen, or Warner Brothers or Netflix didn't want the thing to happen. We tricked them or something. We ran, and so they're like, I don't like this. I'm like, if you don't like it, talk to those companies. If you don't like the product, it's not necessarily, it could be the writer's fault, but you don't know. But it more than likely, there's a lot of people in that food chain that you want to talk to, and those are the people that we're negotiating with. And what they're trying to do, John, is to make our jobs even harder. And they want to pay us less money. They want to
for more work.
About the paying of the amount of money and what have you, that's not even the big problem that we have. The big problem is they're trying to shrink the size of writers' rooms, and that makes everyone's job harder. It makes everyone, it shunts a lot of people out of the business, the younger up and coming writers who will be the showrunners of tomorrow. It's a dangerous game they want to play to save a buck. And we have an opportunity right now, because our contract was up, to make a change. And they didn't want to hear our proposals. And so we're out there, unfortunately we got to be out there picketing and trying to exercise our collective bargaining power to say, come back to the table and take our proposals seriously, and let's negotiate. That's what this should be about. And then people will be able to get their shows again. I want those shows too.
I hear you, man. No, I know, and believe me, it's gonna be.
Thank you for letting me get on my soapbox a little bit. I appreciate it.
Honestly, every WGA guest on Word Balloon, I want to hear all of your individual opinions of what the strike means to you, what the circumstances are. I think Mark Guggenheim put it best on my show when he said, writing for television or film, you should not need a side gig to earn a living.
Right.
And that's very basic. And as you say, the shrinking of writers' rooms, this is wrong.
Episode orders, fewer episodes, fewer people in the room. It's just, they will tell us, hey, the studios will say the business has changed, as if they weren't the ones who changed it. They changed the rules of the game while we were playing it. and that doesn't work. Come back
Agreed.
to the table. Come back to the table. Let's change the rules together if we have to.
You're so right, man. Truly, I saw The Flash last night, and glad I did. But I'll be honest, I had a kind of tepid response to it. And by the way, I just to let people know in the chat that are asking questions, I do see the tips. I really, really appreciate it. I'm not trying to gouge anybody, but if you want one of your questions answered, I do humbly ask that you leave a tip. I'm not the first and only YouTuber to do that, and these are tough economic times, and so I ask you for your cooperation. It's not obligated, and I certainly understand if you're like, I don't want to leave money, no problem. But that means Tim and I will just talk more. But I do see at least one tip, and I will be getting to it in a second. I saw The Flash.
You don't tip John; he'll go on strike. Don't.
That's right. I won't go on strike, I promise.
You saw it. You saw it, and you had a tepid response.
Yeah, I got to be honest, and this was well before their public problems, but I have not connected to Ezra Miller as Barry Allen. I don't, and I'm a longtime Justice League fan, animated comics, whatever, but they decided to make Barry more like Wally in the animated series. I don't think Ezra is an effective, funny person. Yeah, I don't feel that that's Barry Allen, the Barry Allen I know. I love Grant Gustin. I think Grant Gustin does a great job.
Don't forget John Wesley Shipp.
I would never forget the original television Flash, and I was delighted when they made him Jay Garrick. And I've had the pleasure. Terrificon is coming up at the end of July, and John is a regular, and he'll be there again this year. But the first time I met him, I'm like, that was so adorable.
That was an appointment for me. I remember sitting down in the finished basement we had in my little house in Rhode Island, waiting, and then it came on the screen. I was like, yeah, the Flash.
On the heels of the '89 Batman, and it's like, no, this is good. I love this show, and he was a great Barry Allen. No, I absolutely agree. But there was an article in Variety. I don't know if you saw it, because again, this came up 10 years ago, 2013. Where there was a bunch of comic book movies that underperformed. And people were asking the question, have we oversaturated the market with product? I agree with the article, and my response was the same. It's like, no, but I think you do need to make better movies. And I think you need to get beyond the CGI Act 3 that doesn't have a lot of characterization. Now, I do think in the case of The Flash, we got characterization in Act 3. But I could say, honestly, about a lot of Marvel movies and a lot of DC movies, where at the end it's like, okay, big scary CGI beast, and the hero's punching him. It's okay, but when it's done again and again, it gets boring. This is what happened with the Western, and why the Western went from being incredibly popular to, I've seen this before many times.
So glad you said that, because that's where I was going to go, which is to say, the thing about the Western, and this is a little bit of history. The old guys are going to talk for a second, you guys. But the Western was something that was a huge draw in cinemas. And once they started putting it on television, once you could get it for free in your living room, the draw to the cinema just wasn't there anymore. And so eventually that, I don't know if it's exactly that, but I will say that it contributed. The idea that you could just turn on the TV and have a Western, in the comfort of your living room, helped lead to the demise of the cinematic Western until to the point where we had a movie like Unforgiven came out in the 90s, and we were all like,
yes,
when you think about it, is very much like just a pretty basic standard movie that you would have gotten, when
in the 50s,
ruled the cinema. But we thought it was so breathtaking and revelatory. We'd been away from them for so long. So we do have a lot of superhero stuff on TV. Now, I'm not saying that we're oversaturated or anything. I mean, I don't have any opinion about that. I get excited. I want to watch these shows. Some of them I'm really into, and some of them I'm like, I would have done it differently.
Sure.
But I think that you are absolutely right. And I think this is true of everything. It's like, this is how it is in the writer's room all the time. It's like, the best idea wins. You know, the best product is going to win. Like, and if we keep making amazing, you know, comic book related or superhero related, which are different things, as I think Tim Seeley has been out talking about the last couple of days on Twitter, and I love that guy.
Oh, me too, man.
Following that. If that's the case, then you know, then you know, if we keep making the good stuff, you know, if you build it, they will come, right?
Yeah.
You
No,
know, but, you know, I say we, but it's incumbent upon the studios to not cheap out, to, you know, to keep pushing the envelope, to keep making, you know, the best stuff they can make.
Well, and that's what I was going to say when you said, "Hey, the game has changed." It's like, yes, and as you say, they changed the game. The easy access now of waiting 2 months or 3 months and then seeing it on streaming, and the price of a Hollywood or a movie ticket these days here in Chicago, it's, you know, without even trying, it starts at around $20, and it's like, that's wrong. I mean, and again, compare that to a month's worth of streaming entertainment for about the same price, sometimes less, sometimes a little more. No contest. And again, they have made it this way. I thought Paramount was very smart to hold on to Top Gun Maverick and go, no, we're not going to put it on streaming. This is a big movie. It's going to be great on the big screen, and it was. And that's and again, that's the thing. It's for every mediocre or poor television show, there's a Yellowstone. There's a lot of what Taylor Sheridan makes. There's a lot of what Chandra Rhimes makes. All these wonderful showrunners that are capable of quality TV. Same goes for film. Chris Nolan's Oppenheimer. I'm looking forward to it. But I might wait till it's streaming, because again, it's they have overpriced. This is what happened with music back in the early 2000s. I'm watching on Netflix, and I had no idea there's this Swedish miniseries about the creation of Spotify, and it starts with, and I think it's called The Industry, and it starts with the music industry's problems with Pirate Bay from 20 years ago, and it's like, oh my! And again, we all live this.
I am unfamiliar with Pirate Bay.
You don't remember Pirate Bay?
Oh,
all right,
I don't remember it at all.
Yeah, exactly. All right, I'm sorry, Tim. I can be slow at times. Gee, I don't know what I'm talking about either. But
it's young and stupid, and you shouldn't steal content, kids.
100%, man. But like, find a way of addressing the fact that there's a new generation that wants it a different way. Or I was one of those guys that's like, all right, I really like Paul Simon, but I bought the single, the album, the cassette, the 8-track, and the CD. How many more times do I have to buy this goddamn thing to keep up? And I get it. So again, thankfully, things like Pandora and Spotify were created that are ad supported, and artists hopefully, and I know they're not making what they should, but again, the game changed. Find a way to cut the pie better with these new technologies and please everybody, both consumer and creator.
You know, there's a thing that well said, by the way. There's a thing that I've talked about a little bit. I've been thinking, it's the kind of thing I think about all the time, and that's so there are people, I know you're out there, people. There are people out there who will pirate like a movie that I've made or something, or that I've done, and I've seen people justify stealing comics, you know, pirating comic books and things like that, and they justify it to themselves by saying, well, I'm angry at the company for doing something different, or so, you know, they don't deserve my money because XYZ. And you know, when you do that, you're not hurting the company. You're only hurting guys who are generating the stuff,
the creators.
And so, but there is this there is a sort of misplaced. I mean, I appreciate that they want to take a stand against the big conglomerates who, you know, are maybe making some bad decisions with IP that they love. But so I appreciate the sentiment. It's just, I don't think they've quite figured out the right tactic to come at it. And there was an interesting thing I think I talked about this once before too, which is there's Ted Sarandos was on a podcast. Ted Sarandos, who runs Netflix.
Netflix, yeah.
Yeah, he was on a podcast. Yeah, I don't think he does a lot of these, but he did one, and it was such an amazing interview. And I say this as a person who's worked. I've never met Ted Sarandos. I've worked for Ted Sarandos. I've done a few shows at Netflix, but I'm not trying to kiss anybody's butt or anything. It's legitimately a very interesting podcast from somebody who's risen to a very high position in the entertainment business. And he talked about, John, and something that I think might interest you. He talked about in the most eloquent way I've ever heard, the changed relationship between the viewer and the movie, and how back in the day when we were growing up, if you wanted to go see a movie, you had to look it up in the newspaper, find out the time, go to the theater on time, sit quietly in your seat, and not get up to go to the bathroom, if you could stand it. And you watched a thing that was in front of you, larger than life.
Yes.
People towering over you. But now in the age we live in, and Ted Sarandos is partly responsible for this. You get that movie in your living room. It's literally smaller than you now. It's in front of you. You have a remote control in your hand where you can stop it and pause it, go to get a snack, go to the restroom, pick it up, put it down, whatever.
Right.
The movie used to be in control. There was a power dynamic. The movie was in control. Now you're in control of the movie.
Right.
And I think what his point was people's reaction to the content they get now is can turn vitriolic if they don't like it, because they feel a kind of ownership over it, because it's literally in the palm of their hands now and they control it. So you can kind of understand why they would be, if they're unhappy with it, but this is mine, and I make the argument that Ted didn't make, which is that I think comic books are further along that spectrum than movies and TV. Movies and TV just got there. But comics have always been smaller than you. They've always been in your hands. You could always put them down and pick them up, start again whenever you wanted to.
Absolutely.
You've always been in control of how you experience the story.
Yeah.
So for fans of comics to feel that kind of control and relation, the intimacy with the process of the story as it is, getting into their eyeballs, it's understandable that they feel so attached to it and feel so much, all of the spectrum of emotions when they either love or don't love what's going on in those books. So I get it. And we're seeing it happen with TV and movies now. I think the only scary thing about that is comics are not as many people read comics as they used to, as we all know. And it makes me worried that there are lots of things we can look to in the comics industry and in publishing that as to where film and TV are going to end up at some point, sort of a canary in the coal mine. And I don't want to live in a day when it's, when there's just not as much stuff because there's not as many people, who want to consume it. I'm a consumer more than anything else. I generate, this stuff. I'm very fortunate that I get to work in this business, but, I'm just like everybody else. I get to play with the toys that I played with as a kid, but now on TV and in comics and stuff. And, I'll do that anyway, regardless, but I want us to keep living like that. Those were the best times of my life.
And again, it's, it is the kind of agreement and arrangement that I think consumers are willing to pay a reasonable amount for content. But again, the world is changing underneath our feet. COVID, I think, accelerated some of these changes, and we got comfortable watching a lot of what we would watch in the theaters at home. And it's honestly, and especially as an older consumer, I find it an interesting problem. And even watching The Flash was a good example of that. I want to get to some of these tips and questions. And everybody, listen, if you leave one tip, but you have more than one question, I'm going to be cool. I'm gonna let you do it. Like Wesley Jones, for example. Wesley, thank you, Wesley, for the 5. He says, I'm shocked that Titans Academy was your first book, Tim. I'm invested and can still recall the names of so many of those new characters.
These are my people.
Yeah, man. He also wondered if Alan will be seen as a radio broadcaster or even owner as he was in subsequent years in your miniseries. And again, I don't want you to spoil. Feel free to.
But I think I've already kind of, this story really is rooted in 1941.
41.
And so if knowing the history of Alan's life, that part of his life came a little bit later. I hope that, if people love this book and love the idea that Alan Scott is still around, that DC will get to, hopefully I'll get to do some more, but DC will want to do some more and kind of revisit some of those other great times in Alan's life throughout continuity. That'd be great.
Wesley also wanted to know if 4 or 6 issues is enough time to explore characterization.
Well,
find it to put it on screen, but
Wesley, you have asked the question of the day for me, because you know what I did, John, the other day. I was listening to when you had Tom King on recently, and
my guy
Tom said something that I am like, sometimes we're also isolated from each other, and I didn't know that he had this opinion, and I was so grateful to hear him say it, which was, he said, you can't do the worst is 20 pages, the worst, because it's so difficult. You've got so many ideas in your head and you sit down to write 20 pages and you can't fit any of it in there, which is what just happened, by the way. I just delivered issue 2 of Alan Scott, and Andrew Marino and Marquise Draper emailed me. They read it right away. They emailed me and they're like, let's talk. Because I feel like it's probably, I got a lot of stuff in there. We're going to have to kind of, edit a little bit. Same thing goes for like 6 issues. You saw it in the Pride story. 6 pages is not a lot of space. We were able to give you a little prologue, a little on-ramp, but it's tough. It's really tough. I wish that we had more space, but I hope you'll forgive me if the pace of the book has to keep up with the monumental stuff that we're dealing with, and all the big changes in Alan's life that we're gonna see.
Rick O'Connell, thank you, Rick. An Australian tip: if you can cast any actor as Alan Scott, who would you choose? And that's a great question. I'm trying to think both like, no, I was gonna say I used to say for Silver Age Barry Allen, ironically, Jerry Van Dyke to me looks like Silver Age Barry Allen. That's my opinion. But
I was just talking about him the other day. Jerry Van Dyke is great.
Well, actually, all right, I do have a Golden Age one. I'll let you go first if you've got a thought of.
No. Listen, I can't do this. This is the worst question. You're gonna have to let me come back to it and think about it. But
okay,
let me say this. Sometimes when we hear these casting discussions, and we see them happen online all the time, people get dazzled by like someone who already has blonde hair or something like that.
Sure.
I reject that outright. So you can always change somebody's hair color. That's, that hair color is not a big deal. I do feel though now it would be interesting to see an openly queer actor.
And shame on me, Tim, because honestly, I was not thinking of a queer actor.
I'm not somebody who thinks that it necessarily has to be like that. Because I came from the theater back in the day. I had a career as a successless actor in my early days, and I that part of me would say anybody should be able to play anything.
I agree.
And there are some particular stories that I feel should be left to if you're doing a coming out story, something that's very deep and personal, you're going to get a better performance if you have somebody who's experienced it, who really understands it. But most of the time, it's not a big deal. All right, let me have a think about
as you're thinking, the Golden Age actor that I think would be a great Golden Age Green Lantern, and I believe in his origin, this is why they chose his secret identity first name to be Alan, and that's Alan Ladd. Alan Ladd absolutely looks like Alan Scott.
Oh, that's interesting.
This Gun for Hire, The Glass Key, Nevada Smith. I'm trying to think of his big movies. He was a tiny guy. He was not a tall. He used to have to stand on apple crates to be at least a little taller than his actors and stuff, his co-stars. But I think he would have been a great Golden Age Green Lantern.
That's not bad at all. Oh gosh. Oh, this is gonna sound ridiculous, but in his day, do you know who I would have loved? Oh, this is gonna sound ridiculous. I'm gonna get myself in trouble. But in his day, I would have loved Scott Bakula as
Sure.
Alan Scott.
Oh, absolutely.
Really?
No, that's a great
You're
idea.
into it?
I think so.
I love that guy. And I don't know why. Right now, I'm pitching it right now, right here, live. Count Bakula. Scott Bakula as a vampire. Let's do it. Scott.
Well, or play the role now and play him as a senior citizen Green Lantern, which would fit as well. No, he has that wonderful. He's a great looking leading man, but he has that everyman quality that came through as Sam Beckett. Absolutely,
he's so charming. That it's interesting when you watch the new Quantum Leap show and you watch the old one too.
Yeah,
and there's a totally different quality to it when you have Scott Bakula and Dean Stockwell. The magnetism of those guys is very different than the magnetism of the leads in the
sure.
show.
Yeah, Ben and Allison. No, I agree with you. I have to say though, I really was like, God, I hope I like the new Quantum Leap. I love it. And Ben Song is a wonderful character, has that everyman vibe as well. It is different with his girlfriend being in the owl role, and poor Dean Stockwell. Obviously, we can't bring him back. I was convinced that, despite his protests, that Bakula was going to show up at the end of season 1 in some fashion, and I still think it's going to happen at some point. But I really do. I do love it, and I was thrilled when he was cast. I'm a massive Star Trek fan, and too much so. But he was great as Captain Archer as well in Enterprise.
I have just been doing a rewatch of Enterprise, and I have to be honest with you. Some of the episodes I've never seen because when it came out, I was like, I don't think this is the Star Trek I'm looking for. Through the lens of modern day Star Trek, I'm watching Enterprise now, and I'm like, oh, it's Star Trek.
God, Tim, I'm so glad you said that because truly, I do feel like a troll sometimes with my frustrations with a lot of what they've been giving us on New Trek. Ironically, the animated shows are much more Star Trek.
I love the animated shows. But listen, I watch all the live action shows too. It's just that they're different. It's a different show. It's not exactly the same type of thing but Enterprise is still a classic Star Trek show.
I agree, but I think, and I'll keep this brief because good Lord, I spend at least one night a week complaining about New Trek.
We'll call each other after. We'll talk.
But yeah. They really have a very flashcard understanding of Star Trek. I have a feeling they watched a lot of, and now I always blank on what you call it when you put together a video montage of quick clips, like a sizzle reel.
A sizzle reel of Star Trek.
It feels like they've watched a sizzle reel of Star Trek, and like their attitude that James Kirk was always a misogynist, and all. It's like, yeah, when you only see him kissing like alien women for 5-second cuts rather than actually watching the episodes. And hey, I'm not saying in typical leading man 1960s fashion that Captain Kirk got around and left his mark. I don't mean that in a disgusting way, but
that guy's still my hero.
Yeah, and there's more
depth to the character. And not just Captain Kirk, but William Shatner. I like that guy.
Hey man, well, and again, by the way, another if we could go back in time, would have been a great Alan Scott. I think William.
Oh my
God! Right?
That's it. That's the one. William Shatner as Alan Scott. I'm into it.
That's awesome. Mario, thank you very much, Mario. You've always been a big supporter of Word Balloon and comics and everything. But he says so. We'll definitely check out the Alan Scott comic. For him, the best parts of the Flash movie were Michael Keaton, and forgive us for not remembering the actress's name, but Supergirl.
Sarah Is it Sarah Calley? Yeah.
Oh, there you go. Yes, man. And I got to tell you, as much as I am not the biggest Ezra Miller fan and hadn't been since Justice League, I was thrilled to see Michael Keaton back. I thought it was a great supporting role, very significant without spoiling. And it felt like coming home.
I think that for me, that was my headline walking out of the movie. I said, boy, just Michael Keaton for me, seeing him up there doing his thing as Batman, as Bruce Wayne, worth the price of admission for me. You know?
Yeah.
And it makes me so sad that we're not going to see him in the Batgirl movie. And I heard he was going to be in the Aquaman movie, but maybe they cut him out or something.
I don't know. And also, and again, I believe Kevin Smith certainly has his ties to Warner Brothers and DC people, but he kind of telegraphed that if Flash did better at the box office, there were plans to have Keaton do a Batman Beyond as old Bruce Wayne. And it's like, yes, please.
Can I add that man's name to the list of people that I'm just so crazy about in this world? Kevin Smith is one of the kindest, most generous people. I can't believe I had the fortune of getting to work with him and getting to be his friend.
What did you work on with him? Did you work
Masters of the Universe Revelation?
Nice.
For Netflix. Nice. We also wrote a comic book together for Dark Horse based on it as well.
Oh my God! Forgive me. I didn't. I'm not the biggest He-Man guy, but I was I did watch the series and I thought it was great. And also, I really, my friend Susan Eisenberg was Enchantress in it. I know. I love her too. She's great.
I'm crazy about her. I can't believe we were able to get her. I mean, she's so perfect for the Sorceress. She's just
excuse me, Sorceress. Now you see again, showing my lack of He-Man knowledge.
But yeah, Kevin is a genuinely amazing guy. Who and I feel the same way about. I was talking about Jeff Johns earlier. I feel the same way about him. I'm blown away by how generous a person he is. And I will say the same about Kean Tormey, who I said I was going to talk about, and I didn't talk about it. But Kean,
the artist, yes,
has been the artist who I'm working with on who I'm co-telling this story with for this Alan Scott story. He's brilliant. He is an actor's artist, man. He's able to bring so much emotion to a panel, to a face, to a moment, and to me that's everything. And so I'm so grateful to be able to work with him.
Mario, thank you very much. It's very generous. Another tip: Reed Scott from The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel would be a great Alan Scott. Now I'm blanking on who that actor is.
So he was on Veep as well. He was. So did you watch Mrs. Maisel?
Oh,
he's the host of the show.
Of course.
The
talk show host.
Yes. Yeah.
That's interesting. Again, not a blonde guy, but I do like him. I think he's a great actor. I loved him on Veep, loved him on Maisel. Yeah.
He's a terrific actor. It would be a departure for him because we haven't seen him do something, I think, that I would immediately say is Alan Scott. But I think a guy with that kind of level of talent could pull it off.
I'm with you, man. Thanks, guys, for everyone who has tipped. That's wonderful. I genuinely appreciate it. Give me more of your movie and TV resume, Tim. Forgive me, I didn't really.
Oh my gosh! You want me to talk about me?
If you don't mind.
It's my favorite subject, John. I got my start on in animation as a writer with a gentleman by the name of Jim Krieg, who's a producer and a writer who from DC and is just an amazing guy. He hired me to work on. He was running two shows at the same time. He was running Justice League Action for Warner.
Tim, I love that show. Go on.
Oh, me too.
Did you work
I came in at the end of that. We only did one season.
Right.
Sadly.
Yes.
I came in and I wrote 6 episodes, only 5 of which made it to air because one of them was deemed unproducibly big. But it was one of the greatest experiences. I came to it with very little experience as a writer. I hadn't worked in animation, and but I managed to get in front of Jim. He also hired me at the same time to do an episode of a show he was doing at Netflix called Legend Quest, and I learned so much from him and from Alan Burnett. Alan,
that's great. I love Alan.
Those guys are my mentors, and they the stories the Alan Burnett stories alone and the Jim Krieg stories, we could do a whole other podcast about that. But everything I know, I learned from those guys. And so I did Justice League Action. By the way, the episode that they didn't produce was about Mad Mod, the character from Titans.
Okay.
Had been sort of re-envisioned as this sort of Euro trashy pop artist character, and he the episode I titled the episode, well, I titled it "And Then There's Mod." So For some people who are watching this, they don't know that that's a line from a theme song to an old sitcom that a lot of us used to watch with B. Arthur called
B.
Mom.
Arthur from Golden Girls, absolutely,
And-
her original sitcom. Yes.
And so Alan Burnett calls me. He got the script and he calls me and he says, I just have to tell you, I haven't even gotten past the title page and I already fell out of my chair laughing.
Outstanding, man.
I
Donny
was like,
Hathaway,
"Ah."
the great R&B singer, sang the theme song. Absolutely, man.
Yeah, that's right.
Big fan.
So I worked on that. I did a lot of stuff in animation. I did a lot of stuff at Warner Brothers. I did some Scooby-Doo movies back in the day when I was getting my start. And
Cool.
But then I got a call and they said, would you be interested in doing a movie, an animated movie? You'd co-write it with Jim Krieg, and it would be an adaptation of a run of comics called Reign of the Supermen. And I said, you have no idea that you've come to the right place, because those were the first ever Superman comics I ever bought.
Wow.
I didn't buy Superman. I was a Batman kid. And then I didn't buy Superman, not even Death of Superman. It was when Reign of the Supermen happened and these 4 new characters came out of nowhere and like, which one is Superman? And that captivated me. And so I was obsessed with that story. And I said, I'm in. Here's what I want to do. And so we worked on that. We did that movie for James Tucker. And
Good job.
And I got to work with Mike Carlin on it, who was, Carlin was the editor at DC Comics. So that was his story.
Absolutely. He was running the Superman room.
I was like, this is going to be a disaster. He's not going to let me do anything. This is his story. He's going to think he could not have been more supportive. He just retired, by the way, Mike Carlin.
I'm aware. I know.
And for anybody who didn't know, and he should be celebrated. That man has had a storied career.
What 100%, man. I love that guy. Absolutely. And now that he is retired, I'm going to give him a chance to rest for a couple months, and then I'm going to beat the hell out of him to come on Word.
Oh, that guy's got stories. That guy's got stories.
He does, man. And truly, there was a time, and thankfully things are much better now with me and the DC people. But I did approach him about coming on when it was the 20th anniversary of Doomsday, and I don't know who said no, but he's like, well, as long as it's okay with DC, it's okay with me. And, word came from upstairs, no. And I'm like, I talk to everybody. Why not Mike? And it's like, and all I got was because we said so. And I'm like, not cool, guys. And thankfully, those people that said that no longer work at DC. I have a much better relationship with the PR people. Our friend Clark Bull is a good guy. Mike Schelling, good guy. These are good guys, and they've been great to work with, and I genuinely appreciate their cooperation. No, that's great. And man, a moment about Justice League Action. You guys put so much story in. If you broke out the intros and the commercials that ran between segments, this was like a 9-minute story. You guys are writing. It seemed like they were only 10 or 9
they were 11 minutes, and so
okay. All right, sorry, 11 minutes.
Yeah, well, not to get granular, but they're 11 minutes.
Hey, man, 2 minutes. You can do a lot more in 2 minutes than what I'm giving you credit for.
Which meant it was like a 15-page script at the most, which I say at the most, but I would often deliver a 16-page script, creeping into 17, and Alan would be like, come on, man, what are you doing? But the conceit, the idea, the framework, the way that worked, Jim Krieg told me the first day I got there, he said, we basically throw out Act 1. We're just going to throw out Act 1, and we're just going to start in Act 2. And you get right into the fun and games, and then right into the resolution of the plot. And while that's a very good idea, I found that I just couldn't make that make sense. So what really the better way to say it is Act 1 would be potentially very condensed. Act 1 could just be a quick interaction, a quick line of dialogue.
Sure.
And setting up the act, Act 2. That's something I learned from Lauren Faust when I was working on DC Superhero Girls. I wrote a few episodes of that show, which was so much fun. And Lauren Faust is a genius. And she was saying, look, there's moments in a story. Sometimes, there's these key moments, that happen in a story. And like some of those moments when we write our script, which is 11 minutes, might just be one line. The Dark Night of the Soul beat in the story might literally be one little beat. So just do it and get out of it as fast as you can. And she was absolutely right about that. But yeah, Justice League Action was a turning point in my life. It opened up every door for me. Until then, so the guy who was the supervising producer on that show, was running the animation and the whole production, the guy we all reported to was a gentleman by the name of Butch Lukic. And Butch came up on Batman the Animated Series and the Superman animated series. He directed a ton of Batman Beyond. And then he was running this show, Justice League Action, and we had a great time. And when it came time for him, he got the call to produce a movie for DC, and he was the one who took up the charge. The one that a lot of people, I think, shied away from doing was he took up the charge to make the animated adaptation of The Long Halloween. And he I don't know how I got this lucky, but Jim Krieg and Butch Lukic called me. Jim was producing it and Butch was supervising, and they said, "What do you think? You think you want to take a stab at The Long Halloween?" They knew I had, I'd written a lot of jokes for him, but they knew that I had some deeper, darker stuff lingering inside of me that I was ready to bring out on the page, and using, coming at it from as a celebration of Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale's book, which I, like any self-respecting nerd, I was, crazy about. I knew I could do something with it. And the first day I came to them, I said, okay, but I can't do it in one movie. You got to give me 2 movies. It's got to be at least 2 movies. And they said, okay, you can do it in 2 movies.
Wow.
I said, well, but because the nature of it is it's by the calendar, you like the story takes place on, months of the year. And so, but if you do that in a movie, it's like and there's a murder on every holiday. If you do that in a movie, every 2 minutes there would have had to have been a murder. And it's like, it's a snuff film, like I can't do that. So I said, let me do it, in 2 movies. And they said, okay.
That's
I don't know how they said, but they said, okay. And then I said, how about 3? And they said no. But we did. We were able to do it in 2. It actually has been collected too as a deluxe version where it's all put together as one movie.
Oh, wonderful.
And that was an incredible sort of thing for me as well, to get to do that as an exercise, to get to work in that playground for a while. That movie is really beautiful. Like Butch and his team, Chris Palmer, the director, like they really put together a beautiful movie. And then I did Man of Tomorrow, Superman Man of Tomorrow, but we released that one first. We put that out before Long Halloween, which is an interesting story. It's because Matt Reeves was starting to work on his movie, The Batman, but there was question at the time about whether his movie was going to be a direct adaptation of The Long Halloween.
Okay.
And there was a concern that if we released our movie, our Long Halloween animated movie, right before he was releasing his movie, that would be a little bit of cannibalism, I guess, in the market.
No, sure. So
we ended up putting a pause on The Long Halloween and pushing Man of Tomorrow up in the schedule and moving that through. But at the time of my life, the day that I left Warner Brothers after finishing Man of Tomorrow, I got a dream job on a show called War for Cybertron, Transformers, War for Cybertron.
Attaboy.
A lot of Transformers back there for Netflix. That led right into, which I'm just a huge fan of Transformers. Then that led right into Masters of the Universe with Kevin. And then I got to work on a show called Dragon Age, based on a video game series from BioWare. And so those were like 3 Netflix shows in a row. And then I found my way somehow stumbling into comics. So I say I'm being glib about it, but the fact is, the reason I got brought in at DC was because of my animation background.
Sure.
TV. It was, Dan DiDio had an idea that he wanted to bring in people who'd worked in writers' rooms, and so they were accustomed to collaborating with other writers and being able to work out big story ideas together, and then go off and write our own books, which is kind of like when you go off and write your own episodes.
Certainly.
Out of the writers' room. And I think it was a smart idea. And unfortunately, it was tied to the 5G concept that he was pitching, which wasn't, I think, necessarily as popular as his concept of bringing in TV writers. And so that ended up going away. Dan and Bob Harris had to leave DC
right
after they hired me. And so I thought, well, that was it. That was my shot in comics, and now it's not going to happen. And then I got a call from Mike Cotton and Andrea Shea and their group editor at the time, and they, it was, I think it had to do with it because I had reached out to them and I said, Man of Tomorrow was coming out, and I said, hey, I've written this Man of Tomorrow movie. If you guys ever need like backups or anything, I'd love to do something that, like, they had those Walmart end cap books they were doing at the time.
Absolutely. Sure.
Well, I could write some stories that like are done in the style of the movie. We could tie it in. It'd be a marketing thing. It'd be great. And they were like, no, not that. But we got these other things.
Hey.
And by the way, a month or two later, Rob Venditti's Man of Tomorrow book premiered. And I was like, oh, well, of course I can't do a Man of Tomorrow book. They have one of the greatest, writing a Man of Tomorrow book right now. So, but they said, we got these other books. Let's talk about Titans Academy and Shazam at the time. And, but the books I was going to do in 5G were Nightwing Oracle, which was going to be Nightwing and Oracle in their 40s.
Hilarious.
And yeah, I mean, but like dealing with very adult,
Sure.
grown up stuff.
Good for that. Great.
A lot
I love
of story behind them that we never saw. And then I was going to do the Flash 5G as well, which was a whole new Flash character. And I had a whole story that was inspired by the wildfires that were happening at the time in Australia. And it was an Australian character. But all that went away. And so, but happily the other books showed themselves.
Well, I'm fortunate that Dan DiDio still talks to me. And now that he has had time away, every now and then I ask him to peel the onion and tell me a little bit more about 5G. And some of the ideas, I agree, were like, I don't know if I'd like that. A lot of the ideas were incredibly interesting.
Though they were they were ambitious though, John. Like they were all
100%, Tim. You are absolutely, you're swinging for the fences. And that's what every knowledgeable creative in comics has always told me. You got to swing for the fences, and you have to do it with every issue and make a compelling story and really wow people. And I get it. I so get it. And also I wanted to say, I love James Tucker. Everyone gives it up to Bruce Timm, but James followed in Bruce's wake and took over as kind of the, head producer. I don't even remember what his title was. Is there that type of role in DC animation today? Is someone else the new Bruce Timm, the new James Tucker?
Well, I mean, that's essentially what. So Bruce was, Bruce is still a force, of nature. I got to work with him on a Sergeant Rock short that had been and with the Simonsons, with Walton.
Oh, wow.
They had done a draft, and then I came in and worked with their draft. I did some polishes on it, and I couldn't believe I got to have my name on a product with the Simonsons. It was amazing. They were so delightful. And so Bruce, king of animation and DC animation, and then James was, not only The Brave and the Bold, which is one of the best shows that they've produced, but then did that entire string of movies that often get referred to as like the New 52 because they had like similar costumes because that's what was going on at the time.
They had the weird Superman V-neck collar or whatever.
But it didn't follow all the New 52 stuff. Like it was still his universe of movies, and that was what Reign of the Supermen was in the James Tucker era. And then Butch Lukic came in to do the Long Halloween. But while we were working on Long Halloween, there was a decision made by the top brass at Warner Animation to give Butch, to give him the ability to oversee the new animated movies. And James Tucker was going to develop some TV shows. By the way, when he did that, I was developing 2 new series with James Tucker that are pitches that I love so much that I wish that we had been able to make these shows. One of them in particular, both of them, they're so good. But Butch came in and is doing an entire, so all the movies that you've been seeing from Man of Tomorrow, The Long Halloween 1 and 2, Green Lantern, Beware My Power, Legion of Superheroes. Now the upcoming Justice League Warworld. There was also Justice Society World War II in there as well.
Right.
Those are all under Butch Lukic. So
so Butch is.
So he came up. He started out in the early days with James, and in Batman the Animated Series, BTAS as we call it.
Yes.
And now Butch has been helming the movie franchise for DC.
That's excellent. That's like someone in the chat's like James Gunn. It's like no. I realize that, but like you described, what James Tucker and Bruce Timm did in animation, and that's great that Lukic is getting that opportunity now.
Yeah, that guy's he's terrific, and he's a great storyteller, and he gets the heart and the comedy and the drama, and he can do it all. And so I was very fortunate. I got to do 3 movies with him after we got to do those episodes of Justice League Action, which was a whole different thing. By the way, speaking of Justice League Action, I forgot to mention this, which is one of the very first things that I ever got handed to do in animation as a professional writer, John. One of the very first things that ever happened was I walked in and I was handed a script by Paul Dini. And they said, Paul's not available to do the rewrites on this script. We would like you to do the rewrites on this script because we have some network notes and stuff. And so I got to share screen credit with a hero, Paul Dini. And it was incredibly intimidating because I'm looking at the script. I'm like, well, it's perfect, and then, but even perfect scripts, there's going to be the network and the production, they're going to have stuff they need to change, stuff they need to work with. And, but I just, the very idea of walking in the door and getting to have a credit aside, next to Paul Dini, that is just good fortune. That's what I'm benefited from. It's
outstanding, man.
It was
very cool. Like I said, I'm a massive Justice League Action fan. Talked about it with Paul and a few others that worked on it. I was so glad that there was room for Space Cabbie in some of those.
Oh, yes. I wrote a short with Space Cabbie. I was so happy about it. By the way, one of the greatest things about working on that show, especially on Brand New, was the cast was incredible. And I would get invited to go to the record and be there in the room in case they had questions. So here I am, brand new, fresh, and there's Patton Oswalt as Space Cabbie, and I'm meeting Patton Oswalt, and I'm like, and then the people that we had, we were recording John Aston,
Gomez Adams, everybody.
Yeah, right?
The
fact that
John
we
Aston's
had
dad.
John Aston was unreal, and
who did he play in Justice League Action?
He played Uncle Dudley. And he was amazing. He was amazing.
That's outstanding.
And then Kevin Conroy is our Batman.
Yeah.
And a sweeter man has, I don't think, ever graced the recording booth, let alone all of DC and Warner Brothers. That guy was incredible and incredible at his job.
The best, come on, man, hands down. I mean, and again, no disrespect to any of the other Batman, the best Batman ever. He really was.
I'm willing to go there. I'm willing to go there. I think the best Batman. I think the best.
And man, like you said, just a generous soul. I met him a handful of times over the years, and I'm so glad because I never, sometimes it's the Hollywood people and the comic book people. I don't mind walking up to the comic book people going, hey, how you doing? You know me, whatever. But Susan Eisenberg is such a good friend. And they were both at Terrificon just a couple months before Kevin passed away. And he didn't look, I'll be honest, he didn't look good. And that's why I respected his space. But she's like, John, come over, sit, have coffee with us. Kevin, John. And I was very fortunate during COVID. I got the whole Justice League cast and Clancy Brown as Lex Luthor to do a table read. And Susan got everybody back, including Martian Manhunter.
Carl Lumley.
Thank you. Who didn't do it? Did do a lot of conventions back in the day. Got all of them and got Andrea Romano to direct them, and it was just the best hour plus of all of them doing their thing. And Kevin was so great on that. And then so I'm having coffee with Susan and Kevin. And I'm like, Kevin, we've met before. I'm sure you don't remember me. Oh, shut up, John. He remembers you. Oh, sure. Yeah, yeah. And I'm like, I know he doesn't, but it's all right. But we just did. We had a very nice talk. And it was like, oh, I really feel fortunate that I got to talk to him a few times.
Genuine guy. A quick story about Kevin Conroy.
Please.
We're recording him for an episode I wrote, which, by the way, starred the great Diedrich Bader, who's on Real in that show.
Another great Batman. Absolutely.
He's a great Batman, but he's Booster Gold on Justice League Action, and he basically made my career because I figured out how to write for Diedrich Bader's Booster Gold voice, and they wanted him in every episode that I wrote because I could do it. So Kevin, we're recording Kevin as Batman, who is handing over the Watchtower to Booster Gold. He's going to go, back to the Batcave, and it's Booster Gold's shift at the Watchtower.
Monitor duty, yes.
And so Kevin, I've got this dumb line in the script about which I don't think they're ever going to record and it's going to be in the show, where he's just like, yeah, I'm going to go back to the Batcave, check the mail. That was the tone of the show, but it still sounds weird coming from Kevin Conroy Batman, but he was like, let me do it. So he does it, and it's hysterical, but he doesn't stop there. He adds in this line. He goes, yeah, I'm going to that cave, check the mail, feed the cat. We were rolling on the floor laughing because I can't do it. It sounds ridiculous when it's Batman. It's your Batman saying these ridiculous things.
Yeah, man. Those times in the original Justice League cartoon when they let him cut loose in some of the comedy episodes and stuff. No, he's brilliant.
He loved it. He loved to be able to play a funny version sometimes. He always often the straight man in that show, but sometimes he got to be funny, and he treasured it, By the way, Mark Hamill we had as Joker in that show. I got to meet Mark Hamill, and he's doing lines as Joker that I've written for him, and it was unreal. And it was when we recorded him for Watchtower Tours, Hamill, the Star Wars Force Awakens had just come out. And Hamill was like, when we were done, he's talking to all of us. He's hanging out because he's just a guy, and he's chit-chatting. And he goes, okay, to the room. He goes, who hasn't seen Star Wars yet? And a couple of people ridiculously raised their hands. And he goes, okay, get out, because I'm going to talk all about Star Wars now. And they left. And he did. And he said things that I was just like, talking about what was coming in the future for lots of interesting information about things that were the way that process had worked. And I just couldn't believe that I'm sitting there in a room, with Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill, and they're telling stories. I took a picture of them.
Great.
When they were there in that record. And then the two of them ended up sharing that picture back and forth on Twitter and on social media for years. When
that's great.
It was their birthday. They would send that. That was the picture they would always share. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm behind the camera, but nobody knows,
Wonderful. That's outstanding. No, honestly, and John's is like this too, Jeff. I never had the chance to really talk to Mark Hamill, but Jeff has that same excitement about his own projects. And there were so many times, and this is really early days of Word Balloon, when he'd be in the midst of a story arc, and we'd finish the interview. You go, you want to know how it ends? And I'm like, no, I don't want to know how it ends. I'm reading the goddamn book, man. But I really want to talk about it. I'm like, all right, talk about it. But no, that's why I love Jeff. Man. Jeff's great, and I'm so happy for Jeff.
I think of this is something that I never talk about in interviews, but I'm a recovering alcoholic, so when I think about Jeff, I was talking about this with my friend Jeremy Adams on the phone earlier today. We talk all the time. We've been friends. We started in animation together and came to comics, and he's exploding in comics right now, which he should. Very good. I was like, Jeff, it feels like Jeff is like our sponsor. He's like my sponsor. I'll call him for advice. He'll say, let's get lunch, and then I'll tell him what I'm going through, and he'll give me amazing advice. And he's always kind of like, it's like having a big brother too, if there is working on this book on Alan Scott, or when we were on Flashpoint Beyond.
Sure. Yeah.
It's sort of like you feel like if anybody gives you trouble, your big brother is there to kind of, get in there and and help defend you. And Jeff knows how to do that. And it's it's a real joy, getting to work with him and work for him. But sometimes I think of him like he's my sponsor.
I get it. I know that he's been a big brother to a lot of other creators
Yeah.
that have come in his orbit. And no, it's one of the things I really respect about him. And I'm always been a fan. It's Jeff Loeb always used to say, yeah. We all want Jeff Johns to be our boyfriend. And I'm like, yeah,
I've never met Jeff Loeb. And I adapted The Long Halloween.
Yeah.
And I thought, there's no way that guy's ever going to want to meet me, because I feel like I would be ticklish about somebody coming in and taking my thing and adapting it and doing a thing, but then I had that experience with Mike Carlin, and I thought, well, I don't know, maybe Jeff would be cool. I don't know. Tim Sale said some nice stuff about the movie at one point, and that just filled me up.
I bet. Yeah.
And Jeff Johns is friends with Jeff Loeb, and he told me at one point that Jeff liked the movie, and I said,
"Oh, that's great."
I was like, "Come on, he didn't say that. Come on."
Well, I was going to say, broker a lunch with the three of you guys, because really, when they shared their little office, the Empath Treehouse, this is 15 years ago and stuff. Oh my God, they would tell me stories. Alan Heinberg was in the room; he would tell me stories, and no, those guys are just hilarious. And it's I come from sports radio, and before ESPN had their own radio network, the TV guys were on our Chicago sports station all the time. And we really got to know them, and they became friends. So yeah, it was like, hey, I'm hanging with Dan Patrick today. Hey, I'm hanging with Charlie Steiner today. All these great sports names. And yeah, man, no, it's great. So
I am really the worst cliche of a homosexual in that I'm like, you start naming sports names, and I'm like,
don't worry about it.
I'm a big Formula One racing fan, so I know all those guys.
All right, it's not Formula One, but it's funny. There's the American Library Association is having their convention at McCormick Place this weekend, and I'm going to see some comic book people there. The following weekend, 4th of July weekend, they're doing one of those NASCAR races in Chicago. You're aware of this?
Well, no, it's just NASCAR. I went to high school in Daytona Beach.
Oh, there you go, man.
So, NASCAR was a way of life for everybody back then, but I didn't get into racing until much later.
Well, that's cool.
Football back in the day, though, but then I kind of let that go. Yeah,
that's cool. Hey, man, no, believe me, I despite my 16 years in sports talk radio, I'm one of the least sports-minded people that work there. I was there to make comedy and do sketches and I did cover boxing, so I got my cred covering the tough guy sports. So it's like, all right, well, he knows what he's talking about with boxing, so never mind. We won't hassle him.
I got into Formula One only last year, and I'm so in. And the reason I got into it was I was working at Marvel Studios animation all year last year. And I was working on a show that eventually got shut down at the end of the year. It's never going to see the light of day, but it had a race car component in it. And Ryan Meinerding, who's the head of visual development.
I know
Ryan said, you should watch this show, Drive to Survive, on Netflix, and you'll pick up some racing lingo, and it'll help you with the. And so I'm like, yeah, I watched an episode, and I'm like, let me watch another episode, and another, or I burned through 4 seasons, and I'm like, well, what do I do now? And then I realized we were in the middle of a Formula One actual season, and I could subscribe to F1 TV and watch every race, not only the current races, but all the back catalog.
Wow.
So I'm like, well, this is it. So I got heavily into it. So one of these days, maybe there'll be a Formula One driver superhero that's going to show up, and you're going to know who to blame when that happens.
Sounds good to me, man. Well, Tim, this has been great. And
I could talk to you all day.
I feel the same way, man. No, truly, it's great to meet you, and really great stuff. And come back when issue 1 drops for the Alan Scott series, and we'll talk more, and we'll get more into Flashpoint Beyond, which we really didn't talk much about, but some of your other past animation projects. And and hopefully, if the strike isn't over, we'll get an update from you and everything and what you think. But no, it's just been terrific. I really appreciate it, man.
I am so grateful. I've been listening to this show forever, and I'm like, someday maybe I'll get to be on Word Balloon with John. And I couldn't believe it when Clark Bull said, "Hey, John wants to have you on the show," and I'm like, "Really?" so I'm so grateful. I really enjoy chatting with you, and you're such a kindred spirit. And
I feel the same way, man.
Everybody in this business likes you, John.
Oh, that means a lot, man. Truly, thank you. And really, you had me at hello with an Alan Scott series. He's my favorite golden. Him and Jay Garrick are my two favorite Golden Age characters, and any chance to explore their story is greatly appreciated. Thank you, everybody, for the tips and the wonderful questions in the chat. And I hope we represented you well. Until next time, let's see. I'm trying to think. That does it for this week on Word Balloon Live, because I'll be at the ALA conference. But we'll come back next week, and lots of great conversations up ahead. So until next time, stay safe, stay happy, stay healthy.